All right, what's up, family? It's your boy John Bacon from the Bitz podcast. Thank you so much for your support, likes, and ratings. Please don't just listen, but rate me, follow me, and subscribe. This is an amazing way to offer free support. My beautiful queen and I have some books that we have written for your growth.
So the first book we have is a workbook, actually. It's called Healthy Relationships, and this is a workbook through the lens of faith. Because what makes a relationship healthy or unhealthy? So this workbook is designed, it's a 12-week, it's a biblically grounded course, and every week has a few different principles. So if some of our principles, some of our topics that we're covering are respect, cultivating security. And this is not just between a husband and wife. This is between parents, between siblings, between friends, between your bosses, employers. So it's really important, and everyone deserves a healthy relationship.
And also we have The Balanced Life by John Bacon. It covers how to be prosperous in your finances, relationships, your health, your mind, and your spirit. And we also have
The Unraveling, a creative healing journal, pinings, poems, prayers, and ponderings of my precarious life. I've had a testimony of I've had 2 brain tumors and 2 brain surgeries, and I'm super grateful, but I'm still grieving the process of healing. And this is part of the process. In this book, you have devotionals, you have prayers, and you have some ponderings. And in between these pages, there's a space for you to also be prompted to paint and to create your own, or maybe you want to write something in these books. This is part of your creative healing journal that we get to walk through together.
And you guys can just head over to Kingdom Servants First. Kingdom Servants, the number 1, st.com. And you can purchase all 3 of these books. Thank you for your support, your love, and your contributions. God bless. Because I think about this, like I can love you like no man has loved you before. And I can give you everything I can possibly give you. But is there necessarily a commitment for you to actually love me back? Welcome, family, to the Bacon Bitz podcast, where we desire for you to take the bits of information and immediately apply them to your life for success. The ground rules for our podcast is that it will always be encouraging, uplifting, and informative. The areas of life that we will be talking about on the Bacon Bitz podcast is dealing with having a balanced life. I need to hear you say it every podcast. Say valuable information applied equals success. We don't want to just know a whole lot of information. We always want to take the information that we use and apply it, because getting past the battle of the head and the heart and bringing those 2 things into collaboration along with our mouths is what makes us successful. So what we're going to be talking about today is going all in, commitments in relationships. And once again, we are here with the wonderful, dynamic, beautiful, intelligent, awesome woman of God that she is, Diana Acosta-Bacon.
Hey, babe, what's happening?
Great, honey. How are you, sugar?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking.
Good.
Excited to be back.
Yes. So I was talking about commitment.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful subject, because anytime you're in a relationship, and we always talk about any kind of relationship, whether it's husband, wife, parents with their kids, coaches with their players, we're talking about employees, employers, any kind of relationship that you want to go into, it has to be you're going all in for that relationship to have the most productive scenario happen in that relationship. So what I would like to ask my beautiful queen is, have you had some healthy relationships where you've seen the commitment in the relationship, honey?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes for a healthy relationship, because we can all agree we've been in some relationships that weren't so healthy, that weren't so nourishing, that weren't so even kind, and basically not even good, and we wonder why we stay in them. Again, just to recap, we are coming from the Healthy Relationships Workbook. So we're in week 5 now, and this is commitment. And, I think it's really important that we clearly define our expectations and ask what's is expected of us.
Mm-hmm.
I remember before we got married, we had this really cool workbook that we worked through. It was called Before We Say I Do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the lessons or questions in the workbook, I will always remember, I think it's a great question for any relationship, not just husband and wife, but it said, so you and I were across the room from each other, across the table, whatever. And the question was, define wife and husband, not what you expect the role to be and what you expect to be as a wife and what you expect your husband to fulfill for you as a husband. And our definitions, then we got to switch. Okay, we answered it and then we switched papers. So I got to see your answer and you got to see my answer. And they weren't necessarily exactly the same.
Right,
and
no doubt.
We have to clearly define what we expect in this relationship. And also, we need to understand what's expected of us in the relationship. And that was a great eye-opener for us to understand what we're walking in. And maybe because I'm so traditional, I'm first generation in this country, I was raised very traditional values, almost like raised to be a wife, to be a mother. And because of that, what I thought was expected of me wasn't necessarily what you, born in America, maybe thought was expected a wife to be.
Yeah.
So it looked different. So that was an eye opener. So it not only let me maybe not step back, but maybe reevaluate how I was going to walk into this relationship and not feeling overwhelmed at the possibility of having to maintain everything in my own mind, whether it was real or not. It was still in my mind. It was my responsibility to clean, to cook, to take care of children, like this traditional role that somehow people fall into. And that's not always true. So we have to clearly define our expectations. Just like if I were to go into a job, there's a job description that tells me what's expected of me. And then I, at that point, will say, this is what I expect in return. I expect to have insurance. I expect to be able to have some level of safety at this position. I expect a level of respect at this position. This is the hours that you can expect from me. Now I know what you're expected of me. This is what I expect from you, a paycheck. We have clear expectations, but we have to define those and make them very clear. And oftentimes we fail to do that in relationships. We just get into it and just kind of go through flows without clearly defining that. And that's super important.
Because I think a lot of times now, I think we're overcommitting to a lot of things in our lives. I think what we should do is really count the costs when we are getting committed into a relationship, of how much you can give to the relationship, what it's going to cost you, what are you willing to, somewhat pay. It's not so much a financial pay, but you're paying with your time, you're paying with your talent, you're paying with your abilities, you're paying with energy, so you have to ask yourself the question, how committed am I to this relationship or this agreement that we're going into? Because I don't think we take commitment as serious as we used to, and I don't think we put boundaries on those commitments like we need to.
Well, I think a lot of us, I know we're in the generation maybe still that like to handshake, and my word is my bond, and you can depend that I will be where I said I will be.
Yeah.
But there's also some benefit to contracts. You can't just go in there and shake a hand of a car dealership guy and say, hey, I promise I'll pay you. I'll pay you when I can, how I can, when I can, how, wherever it comes from. No, they want a contract. Whether it be with a bank or someone, you have a loan, you have a contract, you have stipulations, you have expectations, and you have to fulfill those. Refusal or lack of fulfilling those requirements will mean that you lose what it is that you came to get. So there's something that we have to communicate with expectations. So and does ideally we don't have to have a contract with the relationship, but with our children, we clearly expect them. When you're in school, we expect you to pay attention. We want you to get good grades. We want you to be successful. When we have a relationship, we want to be able to communicate what you expect of me as a wife and what I expect as a husband, and what this interaction looks like. With friendships, you can expect them to be there. I got your back, sis. Like I'm there for you. And with our friends, that's important. With our siblings, with our friends, with our jobs, even with our landladies, landlords, it doesn't matter. Every relationship requires a level of commitment,
Yes,
a level,
it does.
and that needs to be clearly defined.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So whether it's with respect or in this relationship, there'll be some forgiveness on both parties, acceptance of each other, not acceptance of maybe of everything. Obviously, there's no many me's floating around in the world. So I'm grateful that, guess what, you have your opinion, I have my opinion, and we ought to be acceptant of that in the commitment, because it's not always we're going to agree on every single thing. Putting up boundaries in the commitment, because in order for this commitment to be all that it needs to be, there should be a win-win on both parties. So, but if we don't set any boundaries up front, I've heard this in a relationship that it really blew my mind, of a person that went into a relationship that didn't have no boundaries. But then when they started loving themselves, understanding themselves, they wanted to put some boundaries in the relationship, because that was going to make that person a better individual. But the other person was like, oh, it's too late, no boundaries now, and I thought that was like super selfish. But that's also, they went into it with the relationship thinking, he had no boundaries, she had all the boundaries of what she wanted. And then by the time he had actually come to the conclusion that he needed to have some boundaries for himself to be the best that he can possibly be, they didn't want to give in to that. So I thought that was deep for that to happen. I mean, it's got to be equality. Hopefully, we in the commitment, we're both building each other up and helping each other be the best that we can be. And every time we go into a relationship, it ought to be a win-win for everybody. But we have to understand, if you don't have a commitment up front, find someone, they might just put in whatever they feel like they can put into it, instead of, you having some boundaries on thinking it's got to be a 50-50, or it should be 100-100 in a relationship of people giving their best.
Yeah, we like to think everybody is doing their best. Are they really, like we say that we want to think that way, but you are right. We need to clearly define our expectations out of this relationship.
Yeah.
Just like clearly you don't want to start dating and be like, okay, so what are the expectations? It's kind of an odd conversation at a dating. We're having dinner and be like, okay, so what can I expect from you? Like, what time do you work and how much money do you make and how do you live? But these are questions actually people ask. Mm-hmm. You can see it even in dating situations, even friendships. Yeah. So what do you do? What do you like to do? What are your hobbies? Mm-hmm. People who are artists tend to flock together. They tend to kind of be in the same area. People who are nature lovers, you tend to meet them where? Out in nature. Mm-hmm. We love camping. How do we meet some other camper? Because we're out camping. Right. So you already kind of have things that you have in common. Mm-hmm. But if you start a relationship, as far as that's concerned, you start to get to know the person, and if you meet up and they bail on you or they don't show up, then yeah. So clearly we start to stretch those and learning each other's boundaries and expectations as we continue that relationship. Absolutely. And sometimes we fail those because maybe we have failed to see healthy relationships modeled before us. Maybe we've never had a great boss who respected us and respected our opinion and our job and our time. Therefore, we don't respect our job and we treat it any kind of way. Yeah. That's a huge negative on the part of the person who's never seen a healthy relationship in an employer situation. Maybe they've never had a healthy relationship with someone they're dating, and they've only seen toxic relationships. Therefore, they respond or react in certain ways because they haven't done their work, because they failed to remember who they are, and then they wonder what happened. They wonder what happened, and then they expect things. And people want you to be a mind reader. Like, they expect you to read their mind. That one of the lines that I'll never forget, oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite lines, is from, it wasn't, Waiting to Exhale. Mm-hmm. It was Waiting to Exhale. I'll never forget. And it was a line when I think the woman, I forgot all their names, but I think it was Angela Bassett, and she was in the kitchen or something, and she said, and it was right when they were getting, when he left, anyway, the line she said was, I thought that if I gave him everything he needed, he would give me what I needed. And that's just so deep. And I think that's how a lot of relationships just evolve. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to give them everything that I think they need. assuming and hoping and desiring and secretly praying that they figure it out and give me everything I need. Yeah. Well, did we ever clearly clarify and define what we even expect from one another? And then ask what I need. Mm-hmm. Do we know each other's love language? Do we know each other in that sense? And I think that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. I think because going back to that employee-employer, I think about one of the famous lines that's in the business world is, I'm going to do enough just to get paid, and you're going to do it. I'm going to do enough just to get paid, and then they're going to do enough just to keep this job. So you be like, this is crazy how this whole commitment thing is. But I think a lot of times we have commitments and don't even realize, like a commitment to be somewhere at a certain time. I think we forget about that. Being on time, being committed to that, and then giving your all when you're in that situation, that meeting, that business meeting, that football game, that play, whatever it may be, to be fully committed to it, regardless of what the results might be. Because I think about this, like I can love you like no man has loved you before, and I can give you everything I can possibly give you. But is there necessarily a commitment for you to actually love me back?
No.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught up of, is when you go into it, are you making a commitment to yourself to be the best person that you can be in the situation that you're going into? But in order for that to happen, a lot of times there has to be some boundaries. You have to set boundaries in the commitment to make sure I'm meeting those standards of what the relationship is all about.
Absolutely.
So what do you think, honey, are some great boundaries when it comes to commitment?
Well, I don't know about boundaries with commitment. I think we have to honor and know our own boundaries first and foremost. And secondly, we have to honor and know each other's boundaries, because first of all, I can't know, if I don't know and honor my own boundaries, how can I clearly define those for you? Mm-hmm. Just like before, for instance, if I'm going to have a job, but I've already committed to picking up my children at a certain time. Let's say my kids get out of work at school at 3. Let's just say that. And I work till 2, and the boss says, I need you to stay till 4. And I say, no, I cannot. But let me explain. I'm not going to say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to simply say, I have a commitment to pick up my children. So if I have to leave at 2, so I can do the traffic without feeling rushed, and I can get there and be my best to show up for my kid. I've made this commitment. So that's one example. But I first have to know my own boundaries and my limitations. And sometimes our boundaries are our limitations. Physically, we might have limitations as how far I can go, how much I'm able to do. Mm-hmm. Just like when you have a medical procedure, doctors, sometimes we have medical notes. You can't pick up over 20 pounds. Some people dishonor that all day long, and they end up paying a hard price for that.
Right.
And some people honor that, and maybe they go to work where they're not honoring that. We have to be very clear and be able to communicate that. That's part of our commitment. I can't expect you to be committed to this relationship being healthy in every possible way if I am not willing to communicate where I am and what I expect from you and what I need from you as well. Then I can't blame you when you fail to give me what I am assuming and hoping you figure out on your own. That's ridiculous. But a lot of relationships just evolve that way, and then we get angry with one another because they should have known better. Yeah. Well, I should have nothing. We shoot each other all day long, but the reality is we have to clearly define to one another, and until we know ourselves really well, how can we possibly do that? All the way back to, who am I? Who am I as an individual? Not just as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife. Not only those things, but who am I? Who am I? Who is Diana at the core of a person? What are my values? Where's my level? Where's my morality? Where's my integrity? And what do I want to represent? And how do I want to represent myself? Until I know myself, until I know my own boundaries, until I know my own limitations, how can I possibly expect you to know what I need if I can't even clearly explain and express that to you? That's so important. So you're talking about boundaries. It goes all the way back to, do you even know your own? Because I can't expect you to know mine if I can't even articulate to you what they are. Right. So you can honor those things.
Right. Yeah. I think about a big one is cultivating a commitment to yourself, being impeccable with your word. And it always goes back to, I want you to be impeccable with your word to yourself. Because it's hard to be impeccable with your word to somebody else if you're not impeccable to your word to yourself. If I said I was going to save, a certain amount of money, am I doing that every check? Am I intentionally spending quality time with my loved ones? And will I keep my word to that? At my job, they know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I made it crystal clear. When I first started working at the job that I'm at now, I will do 40 hours a week. And if I feel like doing some overtime, I will do some. But the odds of me working overtime are slim to none, because my commitment to my queen, my commitment to myself, to me is more important than a job. I'm a firm believer in this. If people truly understood how valuable they were as an employee, they would seek to go to the best possible options of where they can work so they can be treated the way they deserve to be treated. Because I've been at places that, man, if you give them a toenail, man, they will run with it. They'll try to have you working overtime 7 days a week if they could, 24 hours a day if possible, because they just want to have a body up in there to fulfill a spot instead of looking out of the overall care of the people that's working for them. Because my greatest bosses that I've ever had, that was something we set up front. And I'm still indebted to each day to a guy named Soma and another gentleman named John Johnson. I thought they were the most phenomenal bosses I've ever worked for. And the beauty of working for them was it was a total commitment on both persons' parts to be the absolute best that they can be at their job. And I am forever grateful for their example of what it is to be a great boss by being committed just as much as I was committed to trying to be the best that I could be at that job. Yeah.
And most jobs, like you were mentioning before, honestly, most people go through and they dance this little, it's like a tight wire, right? I'm going to do as much as I can to not get fired.
Yeah.
Just enough to do my job, but not enough to get fired. So they just dance this little tightrope, and it doesn't have to be like that, because that's a balancing act, and it's stressful to stay on that tightrope without falling over one end. So it's great to have good bosses. Yeah. And you mentioned being impeccable with your word, and that's Don Miguel Ruiz. As soon as you said that, it made me think of the 4 Agreements, and one of the best books I've ever read. Yeah. It's the 4 Agreements with Don Miguel Ruiz, and the number 1 is to be impeccable with your word, and the number 2 is don't take anything personally. This is my motto. Love takes no offense. In Corinthians says, love takes no offense. I choose not to be offended. Even if people are offensive, even if they're cruel, even if they're intentional about being rude, I don't like the way I feel when I'm offended. Therefore, I choose to not take offense. So, number 1, be impeccable with your word. Number 2, don't take anything personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions, just like we're talking about. You can't assume you know what I need if I am not even able to clarify and articulate that for myself. And number 3 is always do your best. Truly, that's simple. Just do your best. And that book is Don Miguel Ruiz. Highly recommend it. And number 5, he has a second book he wrote. It's called The 5th Agreement, and it was the number 5th, and it's just be here now. Just be where your feet are, people. Be where your feet are. Like literally be in it. Feel all of it. Experience all of it. Don't be disconnected. Don't try and multitask. Just be where you are. Be here now. So absolutely amazing book. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah. And I think that's why that part of being in the moment, as part of being committed to that moment of where you're at, not to be overcommitted to think like, I have a meeting after this is over in an hour and a half and I got to be there. Am I giving myself ample time to fulfill all of my commitments? That's the one thing that we have to truly be watchful for, because we can truly be overcommitted, and we are really bad at that in this day and time. The beauty of getting older and enjoying life for where it's at right now is to slow down and to be committed to that moment of where you're at, not just being there, physically, but you're not mentally, or your heart is not there. It's not a good thing when you're not totally committed to that very thing that you have committed to. So one of the things I want to think about is how to cultivate our commitments. That's a very interesting point.
Okay, so one thing I have done for myself is I'm sure I've said it before, and my husband and anyone who knows me knows, boy, I hate being in boxes. I understand the need for structure, but I don't like to be in a box. I don't like to have expectations of you can only go this far, I can only go this high, you can only go this deep. I want to just break out of boxes just because it's in my nature. So one of the commitments I've made to myself is to do something creative every day. So I'm the only one that really has to maintain that commitment to myself to stay creative, and because it really allows me self-expression of whatever emotionally or mentally or physically I might be dealing with that day. Whether I'm having a good day or bad day, I am intentional about doing one creative thing a day. Maybe that is doing painting. Painting is one of my big things. I love to paint. So one way I can cultivate that is I've realized that I was being cheapskate and I was buying the cheapest paint possible. And acrylic paint is already cheap. It's like 50 cents or $1 per bottle, right? And I don't know, the 2-ounce bottles. But I realized I needed more paint, and it was more frustrating and taking me longer to do one piece. Apple barrel paint. It's like this acrylic paint. I believe it's apple barrel. So this one paint, I realized that the one paint bottle that I like, it's the brand Apple Barrel. I'm pretty sure it's the name Apple Barrel. Anything else doesn't work the same. It just doesn't work for me. I've tried all the other ones, and I've tried like 3 or 4 different ones. The ones that are cheap, I'm like, the color looks the same, but the quality is not as high. So that's one example for me to cultivate my artistic routine in painting. I use Apple Barrel acrylic specifically. But it doesn't mean Monday maybe I might not want to paint, so maybe I'll bake. Edible art is everybody's favorite art because we can all eat it. It's delicious. It's fun.
Hey.
It's still being creative. So just find one thing that you can do creatively, whether that's, for me, that's sewing, that's cooking, that's baking, that's painting, that's drawing, that's sketching, that's writing a story, that's whatever you're cultivating. You have to do one thing. It doesn't mean I have to stay in a box and do one specific thing. It means I can do a variety of things, but it's all in the same area. Maybe that means sitting outside with my feet in the ground and just earthing and just being able to touch the texture of a leaf and finding out ways to recreate that leaf, repurpose that leaf. So it might sound to somebody else like that's not something they want to invest in. But to me, that has helped me cultivate my commitment for myself to be my best. Yeah.
Well, and going back to my relationship with Jesus, me cultivating that relationship, which means for me, it says in the Word of God, couldn't you, stand and pray with me for 1 hour? So I think about that on a daily basis of how I've cultivated my commitment to God, whether it's through reading the Word of God, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through fasting, whether it's through being committed by actually applying what He's asked for me to do, in service. I want to make sure on a daily basis that I'm serving people. Because God says if you want to be great in the kingdom, and notice what it says right there, if you want to be great, God has never had a problem with us wanting to be great. But He says in order for you to be great, that you have to be a servant of all. And I desire to be great. And since He doesn't have a problem with it, and I also love serving other people, it's a win-win for everybody. So part of cultivating your commitment, what is it going to take for you to actually get committed, first of all, but also to stay committed, because how many marriages, how many businesses have started and they end up, flopping, closing, filing for bankruptcy, going through a divorce because the commitment wasn't there. So it's knowing how to cultivate those relationships so everybody can be even better than they were when they first entered that relationship of commitment. And one of the other things I would like to know is how do you learn each other's boundaries? Because a lot of times, if we're not careful, we won't verbally say each other's boundaries. So what is a great way to cultivate and study somebody else so we can know that their boundaries?
Well, I think in the beginning, like we spoke about, we can't articulate and express what my expectations are until I first know that myself.
Yeah.
But you are right. When I became disabled, that was something I'm still learning. We're still learning, and boundaries have become now, and it's not just disability. I think with age, a lot of people can understand this, and I think if you've ever bent down to tie your shoes and tweaked your back, all of a sudden you're like, what happened? You don't even know what you did. You're brushing your hair, and all of a sudden you can't move your shoulder anymore. So I think boundaries sometimes become our limitations. My limitations are my new boundaries now. My new boundaries, because I can only do so much. I can't do that anymore. And not everyone will understand that. And we don't need to explain ourselves to everybody.
Right.
A no is a complete sentence. And I think we forget that. And that's part of honoring ourselves and respecting ourselves. And one of the hardest things is also being your own advocate. Yeah. So on those instances, maybe I see something in you, babe, I think you're spreading yourself too thin. If you haven't, like you're just saying, okay, maybe in an hour from now, you have an hour break and then you have a meeting in another hour. And that's great. You physically have enough time to get there, but mentally, are you mentally prepared for that meeting? Emotionally, are you feeling at ease with finishing one thing and going to the next?
Right.
Or is it you're just like flipping through the pages? What are you processing at that point? As far as absorbing, right? And sometimes you just watch me. I know that over the years, I have to learn that different limitations have come up. I've thought that I was able to do, for instance, I had a wheelchair at first, and that was great. I have a manual wheelchair. I'm able to just roll myself around. But as the years have progressed, I've realized it's a lot more difficult to push myself. Now, mentally, I have my own that narration in my own mind that says, because you're too lazy, you're too this, you're too that. And I can say all these negative things, but none of those things are true. The reality is I am struggling and I am having pain, and you recognizing that because you're with me the most, recognizing that in me and saying, hey, I think it's time. And you were the one that went and got me a mobile scooter. Like now I have a motorized wheelchair. It's been a huge blessing. It's been a huge blessing for me, because now I'm able to go and do a little bit more, where I would say no to people because I knew it was too late in the afternoon. It was 1 in the afternoon. I'd love to see you for lunch, but my energy level was not where I wanted it to be, where I would be present, because I would physically be struggling. And then I'm not gaining anything. That's just one example that's my personal example. But that also goes for anybody. You don't have to be disabled. You can just be older in the day. You can, later in the day just becomes, I'm not an afternoon person. Maybe you're not a night person. Knowing your limitations. Some people wake up, I used to wake up at 3 a.m. A lot of people wake up very early. So if you try to do, hey, let's get dinner at 8. I'm asleep for a lot of people. Knowing those boundaries and saying, hey, no, I can't do that. Can we meet for brunch, or can we meet for breakfast? Learning that and expressing that to another person, saying, hey, you know what? I go to bed early. I get up early. So that's not going to work for me, because I really want to be present. Yeah.
But I think that's phenomenal, to stay committed to yourself, to say, I would love to do it, but I just can't physically or mentally be of any use to you that late at night, because I've made a commitment that at a certain time, I want to get some rest, or my body just cannot take it. Meeting with you, that don't mean my heart is not there, because I know my baby, just using her as an example, she's a big heart person. But we have to say to ourselves, am I committed to myself to keep my word to myself, to say, I need this much rest. It's later in the day. I can't do this. And we probably, just can't, for the sake of this being a productive meeting of, hearts, that I just can't, be the best that I can be for you at this time. So I think that's super important, because in cultivating the relationships, we got to understand, and just using the marriage, because that's, me and my baby, as we're getting older, as my baby has had to go into a wheelchair, we stay committed to saying, you know what, When we said till death do us part, we meant that, for sickness and in health, for richer, for poor, for better or worse. We made that commitment. So we still are always working on cultivating our relationship. I think we just came down, we just came down from Mount Lemon, where we go to do camping and just being out in nature and enjoying the beautiful weather. And that's a part of a commitment that we made to ourselves, is that we were going to take time away from everything and everybody and just go reboot our souls and reboot our hearts and reboot our spirits to be the best that we can be for everybody that's around us, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can't be great for everybody else and present for everybody else and show up for everybody else if we aren't willing to show up for ourselves.
Amen,
if we're not willing to be everything for ourselves, if we're not willing to cultivate our own personal mental well-being and stability, it's super important.
Yeah. How do you think we can express healthy affection and love for the people that are around us, whether it's parents, whether it's our siblings, spouses, kids, our church families, whoever it may be? How do you think we can better express our affection and being committed to those relationships?
As we get older, it looks different. It's so much has changed, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to when our children are young. Our commitment with cultivating our family's relationships. We go to parks, we go swimming. I remember, we used to spend so much time with all the kids, and it was like the greatest joy of my heart. Mm-hmm. And although I was utterly exhausted cooking and cleaning and doing so many things, our commitment to cultivate great memories far exceeded our exhaustion. And in those early years, it was swimming, it was going to the park, it was that. As they got older, it maybe turns into movie night on a Thursday night. It maybe little by little it goes into allowing them to go out with their friends and cultivating, hey, we're having breakfast tomorrow together as a family, or we're doing lunch. And then as they grew and left the house, then we used to do Bible studies. We used to do family Bible studies on our house on Tuesdays. And then it got to the point where they started leaving town and they just got busy, and they have their work schedules and their families. And wow, it's just, we come back to ourselves, to come back to each other, and we come back to ourselves. So if I haven't committed to cultivating that within myself, I'm not good for you, and I'm not good for everybody else. But in those moments, cultivating relationships with others looks very different according to the need at that time in that season, and recognizing that and honoring that. And just like I said prior, I've learned, and I am still learning, some new limitations. And I think a lot of people can understand that there's long COVID happening now for people that they're surprised at some of their limitations, that they're like, I'm only 40, I'm only 30. Like, what is going on with my body? And where's my memory? Like, what happened? And we're learning new limitations. We're learning new boundaries. We're learning new ways of eating. We're learning better ways of taking care of our health. So how to cultivate certain things needs to be super intentional. And our why should never change, but our what and our how we do it and what we do will forever evolve and change and sway, and sometimes go really slow, and sometimes means sit down quietly and maybe read a story together, or watch a movie, and sometimes it means just going to bed, and sometimes it means planning a trip. So I think that's dependent on the individual to know, but to always remember to first cultivate yourself, to be able, we always have to make sure we are at our best to be able to be our best for others. Because
as you were saying that, I was reflecting back on a commitment I made to our sons. I had one of the sons' best friend, and then two of the sons. We would meet every Sunday night at 6:00, and I wanted to teach them everything I knew about being a man before they graduated high school, because that meant the world to me. That I would be intentional about pouring into them and asking them and telling them about everything, whether it was drugs and alcohol, whether it was pornography, whether it was sex, whether it was selfishness, ambition, whether it's the faith in the Lord Jesus, whether it was, mentally, stimulating conversation, whatever it was. I wanted to make a commitment for 3 years to pour everything I could into them. And to see those young men, we just came back from South Dakota to see our one son, Abraham, and his beautiful bride, Amber, just get married. That was wonderful because it went back to the reflection of those 3 years that we made a commitment. Seeing my one son, he's over in Greece playing basketball. That was from the commitment that we made 3 years ago to pour into him and give him, everything as a man that I can possibly give him. And I'm so grateful. But I also have to say for one of the other young men that was with us, he didn't heed to, but we still made, again, that was a 3-year commitment. And whether, the people take the advice that you give them and the wisdom, you have no control over that. But my part as a man being committed to the sons was, I'm going to give you 3 years every Sunday at 6:00. And we made that commitment and we kept it. And it was such a beautiful thing because if you're not intentional about your commitments, they will literally gradually just wither away. And you'll never have, what you wish you would have had if you had not made that commitment in the relationship.
I think if we are not willing to commit to what we believe in, what we stand for, and what we support, that others will make those commitments for us.
Amen. Amen. So we always say signs of a healthy relationship is people are not responsible for your happiness. They are not. And getting ready to close on this wonderful episode, we're going to read something to finish off the episode with 1 Corinthians 13. Verses 4 through 8a.
So as you said, other people are not responsible for our happiness. Happiness is not something you can find outside of ourselves. Happiness is something we find within ourselves. So cultivate knowing yourself. Cultivate figuring out what are the things that make your heart just breathe and sing yourself happy. That's what I personally do. I sing myself happy. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It's not puffed up. It doesn't behave rudely. It does not seek its own, and it is not provoked. It thinks no evil. Love does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. So I'd like to add a little something and leave you with this. As you enter relationships, specifically with the thoughts and the ideas of possibly a future spouse, I would love you to look at this scripture and replace the word love with that person's name. And if they don't fit that, then you need to reevaluate that relationship. So as an example, for instance, I would place, instead of love, I would say John. John suffers long and is kind. John does not envy. John does not parade himself around. He is not puffed up. He does not behave rudely. John does not seek his own and is not provoked. John thinks no evil. He would, in turn, replace my name with the word love and say, Diana does not rejoice in iniquity. Diana rejoices in truth. Diana bears all things. She believes all things. Diana hopes all things, endures all things, because love never fails.
What a way to end this wonderful episode on commitment. We love you guys. Pray that you will have a phenomenal day, and God bless.